Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here today on Friday. So happy Friday, everybody. My name is Carlos Maruri. I'm a counselor at Compton College, and I am also the chair for FACT's Professional Development Committee. And I'm not going to steal Wendy's full spiel here, but I will put in the link. You know, if anybody out there is interested in joining FACT and serving on a committee, I'm going to put the link so you can sign up. Okay. And so now I will pass it off to Wendy.
Thank you, Carlos. Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Brill-Weinkoop. I'm the president of the Faculty Association of the California Community Colleges, or better known as FAC. And I'm really excited to be here today. And I think we have an awesome panel that will provide a lot of great information for you. And I've been asked by this wonderful panel to just take a few minutes of your time and let you know about who FAC is and what we do. So FAC is not a union. Many people confuse us with a union because of the name, but we actually have existed long before the public unions in the state of California. We began as a group of faculty who joined together in the 1950s, seeing a need to have a voice at the statewide level. And I'm sure many of you know that there have been many statewide policies that affect our students and how our students succeed. And faculty way back in the 1950s said, wow, we need to have a voice up there in Sacramento. And so they joined their resources together. They created a membership organization, and that membership organization has grown into what FAC is today. We do two main things. We work in the statewide legislative area, and then we also do a lot of professional development, which is one thing that brings you here today. And I think it's important to understand that FAC did help create the public employee unions in the state of California, and then we also were very helpful in creating the Academic Senate. So between those two bodies, the state of California, the faculty in the state of California have an amazing voice. And if you go to some other states, you'll realize that they don't have that voice, and their students are being affected negatively because they don't have that voice. So FAC is still needed. However, even though we have the senates and the unions most definitely stay within their scope of working conditions and compensation when they lobby. And then the Academic Senate cannot lobby by the definition of their nonprofit status, but they do stay within the realm of what we call 10+1 or academic professional matters. So FAC, we don't have a lane. We can advocate at the state level based on anything that affects our students and their success and faculty needs. And then of course, professional development. So thank you for listening for a few minutes. If you're interested in joining FAC, if you're part-time, it'll cost as much as 1 latte a month. And if you're full-time, it's about 3 lattes a month. I speak in Starbucks language, and it comes right out of your paycheck. So some people don't even know that they're already members, but we'd always love to have you. By numbers, we will strengthen the faculty voice in the state of California. And with that, I thank all our wonderful panelists. I'm so excited to stick around and hear what they have to say, and welcome everybody. Take care. And I'm turning over to Maria.
Yes, thank you so much, Wendy. It's always great to learn more about FAC. So when you guys become full-time counselors and adjuncts, I highly encourage you to join FAC. So my name is Maria Garcia. I'm an EOPS counselor, and I work at El Camino College. I have been full-time faculty since 2016, and I also sit on committee for FAC for professional development. So I will be your moderator for today. There's about 100 and some people, 170 here today, so welcome. We have a few questions. We have great panelists today. We'll introduce them in just a minute. And just to remind everyone in our virtual room, this is a, how to get land a full-time faculty position, and it is specifically to counseling. So FAC does a wonderful job with these webinars and, getting the word out, but this is specifically to full-time counseling positions. So with that said, the way that the webinar is going to go, we're going to ask our panelists questions. We'll have an opportunity to hear from them. We do have a Q&A, which you can enter questions. but just, so we'll get to those at the very end. So we'll definitely allow time for Q&A. So feel free to put your questions in there and we will get to as many as we can. So as long as we stay within our time. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists. I'll give them about 2 to 3 minutes. So panelists, you'll have about 2 to 3 minutes to briefly introduce yourself. And if you can also please include your journey. We always like to hear how someone got to, the position that we got, right? I do remember asking a lot of questions about that from my mentors. So I will go ahead and start with Dr. Dipti Patel.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you today. As Maria said, I'm the Dean of Counseling and Student Success at El Camino College. My name is Dipti Patel. Been here for 21 years in the California Community College system. Prior to that, I worked at UCLA, and prior to that in the nonprofits. My master's is in rehabilitation counseling. So my journey started working with individuals with disabilities, which helped me transition to UCLA. I actually was a career counselor there before coming to El Camino College. But at ECC, I was an adjunct counselor within our Special Resource Center, which is the DSPS program here. Not only as an adjunct counselor, I had an opportunity to teach while I was there, take on and write some grants, and eventually I became the director of that program prior to coming to the counseling division at the same institution. It's been a fantastic journey along the way, and looking forward to seeing and assisting you on yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. And now we have Dr. Steve Batista.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Batista. I currently work at Santa Ana College, where I serve as a counselor and program coordinator for our Center for Teacher Education. As I was reflecting back on the time, I'm grateful to say that next month will mark 27 years as a full-time employee in the California community colleges. My journey started actually here at Santa Ana College as a classified employee, and at the time it was called Rancho Santiago Community College. I was here for working in the transfer center as a transfer specialist. I left this job to become the transfer center director at Fullerton College. That was my dream job, leaving out of Santa Ana College and landing into a role like that at a community college. I loved the college. I loved the work that I was doing. I loved the students that I was doing. What I didn't love was the fact that the job was an administrator. And so Fullerton College, the classification of that work, and we can talk about that a little bit later, was an academic administrator. And I truly wanted to work with students and teach classes and do that type of work. So I eventually ended up coming back to Santa Ana College. This is year 22 for me. And I'm very grateful and humbled to be at an institution for so long. And again, happy to share in this work, the work that we do to help others enjoy this pathway. And for me, it was really about when I was on the journey, individuals mentoring me, working with me, explaining to me how this all works, and then really shepherding me even as a new professional. And so the part of the work that I love doing is giving back, and been doing that all of my career. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batista. Sara Nez Lucas.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. My name is Sara Nez Lucas, and I am currently the interim transfer center faculty lead at Santa Monica College. This fall, I will be starting in my new position as chair of the counseling department. And I'm very excited to begin that journey as well. And I think Steve took me back to reflecting on where I started. I'm a proud product of the community college. As a transfer student, eventually I knew I wanted to go back to the community college to serve students who, like myself, were first generation, low income students who wanted to, continue their education. I started my career as a University of California representative for UC Santa Barbara, where I got the opportunity to go to different community colleges and really strengthen my passion for wanting to go back to the community college system and be a support to students there. I was after I finished my master's degree, I started as a community college counselor part-time, and I spent about 10 years as a part-time community college counselor, and that's a conversation that we will have with the questions that Maria will share with us. But you know, everybody's journey is a little different. Once I became a full-time counselor, which probably has been 6 years that I've been as a full-time counselor, and within that, within the 6 years, I went from a full-time counselor to a lead in my department, and now serving as the transfer faculty lead. And then, like I said, starting in the fall, I will be the department chair. So I'm looking forward to sharing my experience with you. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. And Cass?
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, and welcome everybody who's willing to sign in on a Friday and to join us to land that job. I'm happy to share that I knew that when I went back to school, I had a career change. I was working in a law office, and I had a career change to go back and get my master's in counseling. And from there, it was back in 2011, and everybody was trying to get jobs in the schools, and I personally took my time. I continued my volunteering, my internship at Long Beach City College, and built a really nice relationship with the transfer center coordinator there. And because I was willing to help and lend my time, he referred me to apply for a position as a transfer center specialist at Santiago Canyon College. I was there as a classified employee for about 2 years, and then I was offered to teach a counseling class. So for about 2 years, I was half classified and half adjunct, and that led doors to open up for me. I think I provided a lot of quality work. They knew I was versatile in what I could do, and I actually remained there as an adjunct for 8 years before landing my full-time position at Santa Ana College for the last 4 years. And so I love to share that experience. I love being a mentor for my adjunct employees from different realms, and just letting them know that that your work gets noticed. And it is a lot of hard work, but as an adjunct, I had a lot of not free time, but I had time to observe and be in many different areas that allowed me to gain the knowledge, so that when I did apply for a full-time position, I was able to answer those questions, feel confident in myself, and definitely just had enough practice with meeting my different colleagues, meeting different students, and working with administrators freely during my time as an adjunct. So ask me anything in a little bit. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Anne. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Flor Huerta.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so enthusiastic to be here with you all in this Zoom space. I've been looking forward to today. Just like many of our colleagues that just spoke, my story also began in the community college system as a first-gen EOPS student. And I also navigated through the system. I was able to find some folks that were able to support me throughout my journey, and ask a lot of questions, as many of you probably went through as well. Transferred to Cal State Long Beach, did my undergrad in sociology, figured that out later on after I transferred, and then went into a master's program in counseling, career counseling emphasis. I started my journey in higher ed at an earlier age. I used to go from the high schools over to, from the community college over to the high schools in outreach. And so when I got to Cal State Long Beach, I was in a position where I was given an opportunity there in outreach, and I worked with some of the best folks like Bruce Bansil and Rosa Carrillo and Irma Chuleta. And from there on, I started to network, and I was able to meet some really great folks, just like Dr. Bautista that's in the room with us. And I was hired at Fullerton College as a classified temporary, and then as a full-time classified permanent position. And that's what really started my trajectory in terms of really solidifying what I wanted to do. And so I was able to really network and get to know folks and have opportunities both at Santa Ana College and Fullerton College as an adjunct counselor. And then I landed my full-time job a semester after graduate school. It was a different time back then, but however, it was definitely competitive, and I learned a lot from the process. And I've been a tenured faculty now for 20 years. I worked in the system for close to 24 years. I've held many different roles, whether it was coordinating Puente, being the student athlete counselor, coordinating Title V grant. I also got a little bit of being an interim director at Transfer Center, an interim dean in my district. So I've had the privilege of being in different roles and understanding the different pieces to the hiring process of a full-time tenure faculty as well as an adjunct. And this is really full circle for me because when I did my dissertation and my doctoral program, I wanted to do something that was exciting, that really brought some energy and really would hopefully contribute to what we do on a daily basis. And so I did my project on, or dissertation on, the perceptions of community college leaders on adjunct counseling and professional development. So I'm super happy to be here with you today and provide some insight, but also learn from you. And this is I always say this is a two-way street. We always keep learning. And so I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Huerta. You mentioned Bruce Vansel. I think we all knew Bruce Vansel. So, all right, so we are going to get right into our questions. And we will start with Dr. Dipti Patel. So the question is, from a dean's perspective, can you talk a little bit about how often campuses open full-time counseling positions and how certain positions are prioritized over others? How often do you open an adjunct pool or offer full-time positions in counseling?
Okay, so community colleges open full-time positions every year. It goes through a faculty prioritization process at the college, and a lot of that is driven by something called FON, the faculty obligation number. Now, how many of those positions are a counseling position may differ among the colleges, right? And that's where the difference. There are some nuances at each of the institutions in terms of how they make that decision, because there are some other factors that each of the institutions will look at. In that faculty prioritization process, know that there is representation across the college with instructors and faculty members, as well as administrators. And so here at El Camino College, that committee is co-led by Academic Senate, as well as our Vice President of Instruction. At other institutions, they may have something called a faculty prioritization committee as part of their shared governance process. And a lot of this is tied into Ed Code, so that process may be very similar. With the exception, it may differ a little bit at those institutions that are part of Personnel Commission, and there are a handful of those across the state at, here in California, like Long Beach and LACCD, and I believe actually SMC as well. So in terms of positions, every year it's happening. Some of the backstory in terms of counseling positions is we have these other things like the 50% rule, and counselors don't count in that part, which sometimes contributes to that. It hasn't been as much of a concern at El Camino as it has been at other institutions. I think the other thing to look out for when you're seeing openings is to look at, is it a tenure track or non-tenure track position? And that also differs among colleges. At El Camino College, we have not had a practice of offering a full-time position that's non-tenure track. But other colleges, particularly in consideration of maybe the funding source, they do offer non-tenure track positions. So there is a little bit of a difference there. Doing some research on community college web pages and their human resources pages might help, and looking at their agreements might give you some guidance on what the nuances and things like that happen. These faculty prioritization committees are just making recommendations to the president, and the president or the superintendent or the district office usually makes that final decision. How many counseling positions you have, that's going to differ from year to year. When we had SSSP, Student Success and Support Program monies, we saw lots of positions being offered in counseling, and that can change. Right now, we have some other funding sources coming around. We've had AB 19, we have SB 85, we have Student Equity and Achievement, and some new funds starting in July, and that may change when those how many positions are out there that we're recruiting. Typically, if it goes through that faculty prioritization process, these are positions that are through the district funds, not categorical funds. That can differ. And so for that, you're typically going to see those job postings happening sometime in the fall, maybe towards late fall or early spring, because they're recruiting them for the following fall year, right? So that faculty prioritization process might happen in, let's say, September, October of one year, making some decisions of what's going to be hired for the following. At times, you will see spring hires come about, and it may be for a variety of reasons, meaning a spring start, vacancies. Some of our institutions have offered like golden handshakes and things like that that have required some spring hires being open, but typically it's for the fall. Rarely, but some of our schools have things like endowed chairs or endowments. And so you may see something like that come about in terms of a search or a failed search for other time periods. I think the second question is, how often do you open an adjunct pool? As positions are needed. And sometimes mid-year, we may see that there's a need. Individuals have reduced their hours or availability. That is something that we see very common among part-time counselors, is that they're not working at just one institution. They might be working at 2 or 3. And if they change their availability, we may need to open a pool. You should be aware the size of these pools when we open these positions. It is very different than other academic disciplines, right? And I think that does make an impact. When I have seen counseling pools as large as 425 applicants, right? And so it's not uncommon for, even in these times, having well over 100 applicants come into these pools. And so I like to do them once a year for that reason. I usually post them in the spring, and we select who's going to be in the pool, and then we bring them on in the fall, and then, with changes, other individuals in the spring as well. So as you go through that process, you may want to find out in terms of how quickly you may be getting an assignment, and or in which areas you may be getting an assignment. In terms of the part-time positions, that also may vary in terms of how they're offering them. The kind of hours that they offer. Does that, in terms of the max hours that you may work during week, that can vary from district to district. We tend to keep it under a full-time faculty load, so that's under 67% load, which is at El Camino, it's no more than 24 hours a week. So those are some of the things in terms of how often do we open pools. And I think we're waiting for questions till the end in case I didn't address.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dipti. It's really informative. I was a spring hire myself. Okay, the next question is for Steve, Flor, and Sara. Can you talk a bit about your experience as members of a hiring committee? I know you cannot talk about specific committee experiences, right, that you have served on, right, because we have to maintain confidentiality. But what tips can you offer professionals applying for the first time? So if you can specifically speak to job search strategies, preparing for the application, and things like that. So, and feel free, whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll start if that's okay. Is that okay? Yeah, so in terms of just experiences, and I think it's really important to kind of give context to all of this. And I want to do as much as we can to kind of peel back the layers so folks know how the process works, kind of pull the curtain back and see how this works. So let me just talk about the process when a position opens, either a full-time or an adjunct. So the position flies, we get all kinds of applications, right? And these can be hundreds of applications, or depending on the nature of the position and the college that's looking to hire. So then a process needs to be put into place to screen these applicants, and it's very highly regulated by HR, and it's very structured. And so there's very little things that we can do to tweak the structure. It's very much centered in human resources with all kinds of different rules and regulations. So it typically begins the process of the application screening is that we have to, the committee has to create a rubric to decide how we will actually evaluate the paper that has been provided, the applicant's information has been provided. And so that rubric typically has maybe 5 or 6 different things that are determined by the committee to seem that are part of the screening process that are highly valuable to the candidate we're about to hire. And these are criteria that should be available for us to be able to observe in the application materials and for us to be able to evaluate objectively in the application materials. And so it becomes then a score sheet against the paperwork that we're looking at. And so that's why it's really, really important in terms of the paperwork, that it's really, really clean. And a lot of this is done electronically now. So also know that, you know, we're reviewing all these applications through our screens on our laptops, at our desktops, clicking a lot of different buttons to open up documents. So just making sure that your documents are super clean, they're PDF and not on Word, and those kinds of things are really critical. But in terms of the experience, when I'm screening applicants, I'm looking for those criteria that we have set out, and a lot of about the job specific things like how much experience that you have, where have you worked, was that a full-time position, was that a part-time position, what kind of things did you do, what kind of populations did you work with, and what were the tasks that you were doing in those jobs. And so particularly for counseling, I'm looking for working with students, you know, working one-on-one with individuals, maybe doing some teaching or workshop presentations, so that we know that you have those skills, outreach, those kinds of things as well. And then also looking kind of the breadth of experiences that you have, you know, is it multiple places, maybe multiple areas where you're working or multiple groups that you're working with. And then I'm also looking at professional development too. You know, what kinds of things are you involved with outside of the work to really show that, as Anne was sharing, that you're really eager to learn and to learn more, because counselors, we do a lot. Our jobs are very multifaceted and we have a lot of things that we do. So I think that's important to know. So, you know, even though you feel like you have a lot of things to add, you're going against a rubric, a criteria, and I'll drop some of what those names of some of those criteria might be, so you can see what we're looking at. And I'll also drop into the chat also kind of a scoring sheet, so you have a really clear idea of like, okay, this is what the score that they're having to do, and then at the end of the day, it's basically like a numbers game. So we're looking at, of the 180 people applied, who got the top scores are the folks who are going to move on to the interview round. So I'll pass on to my colleagues for other advice.
So I'll chime in here. So, you know, to add to what Dr. Batista just mentioned, I think one of the things is just right off the bat is making sure your application is complete. You know, there might be a season where there's many different openings and you might be applying for different places. So the detail in where you're applying to, it goes all the way down to the resume and perhaps the cover letter in terms of who you're, what you're applying for, what position, right? Because there could be different positions, different programs that you might be applying for. And so that's part of it, especially, and as I mentioned, having a complete application, because depending on your HR process and standards, your business process, that you might be weeded out at the beginning, therefore you wouldn't have any opportunity, right? So, or perhaps the committee is part of screening that. So I think it's really important to just kind of think about that, because that's one of the biggest pieces that right away, folks are not able to even get their foot in the door to even have an interview because of that. The other piece is, you know, it's just such, after 20 years, and I think my colleagues and all of you could understand this, being a California community college counselor, it's one of the best roles we can play in terms of, or we can be in in the system, in the state. You know, it's so unique, it's so diverse. There lends to be a lot of creativity, a lot of detail. And so because of that, you know, your resume really is saying kind of a short story of who you are, right? So it's a picture, it's a snapshot. You know, we talk about this with our students, those of us that are teaching career development courses, right? What do we tell our students when they're developing the resume? Making sure that the resume speaks to that position. So going through that position, having specific language that perhaps that campus is looking for, understanding what the language, but also understanding the populations that you're working with so that you can embed that into your resume, into your cover letter is super important. I think in terms of the experiences, I've been in both adjunct and full-time tenured positions, as well as full-time temporary positions. It's been pretty much across the board is looking for direct counseling experience, that one-on-one with students. So there's the whole, I know all the community college info on the transfer, the ed planning, the ins and outs, the details, CSU, UC, IGETC, general ed, all that good stuff. But then there's the other piece, you know, that we have to really consider, and especially nowadays, it's so timely with pandemic, post-pandemic, perhaps, you know, the conversation of who are the students nowadays, right? How are we providing that holistic, comprehensive counseling, and how is that going to show in my resume? Because remember, the resume is the first snapshot of what the committee is going to look at. So yes, there's that direct counseling that's super important. Perhaps that teaching or co-teaching. Some of you might be at campuses where you might not get a class assigned to you, but you can co-teach. So putting that into your resume, having folks, other colleagues to look at your resume always helps. And making sure that you use a language, very similar language that was in the position, right? The duties of the position, what they were looking for. It's super important because we're looking through, you know, as the Dean Patel mentioned, we're looking through hundreds of applications, and you want yours to be highlighted and stand out, okay? I think the other piece is, and part of it is making sure you do your homework in terms of once you get that interview, is that presentation. Talking to folks, maybe going on the campus, getting to feel the campus so that that can be infused in your presentation and you understand that campus. I think that's super important. And so that I'll leave it at that, but really getting to know how you're going to contribute to that campus. And
I'm not sure, did she freeze for everybody else?
Yes.
Okay, Flor.
Did. If I can chime in too, I think one of the questions in the Q&A was, and I wanted to address that, our career changers. Absolutely, I work with many colleagues that had a different career prior to coming to community college and becoming counselors. I think the most important thing is understanding that the experience is very important. And I think Flor was talking about that in that, yes, you could have a previous career, but you also need to make sure that you have the counseling career. Now, another thing that always comes up is, and I think I saw it in the Q&A, is, you know, high school counseling compared to community college counseling. They are completely different. You know, in a general counseling department, you're going to get students from all walks of life, re-entry students, students what we call reverse transfer students. There's a lot of different types of students, where high school, you've got your high school case and you know your students, you've met with them since like the 9th grade. So it's a little different. And I think one of the things that's very, very important is having that experience, having the experience of community college, because when we're looking for full-time faculty, you're going to get trained on the campus to get acclimated to the campus that you're now working on, but your skills, what you need to know should already be, you know, part of your application. So, you know, that's one thing I just want to touch upon. I absolutely love it when we have a career changer, because I think they also bring a different perspective of, you know, what it's like to be a counselor and what it's like to work outside of education. And the other thing, the other thing that I wanted in this, one of, you know, the question was like, what tips can you offer new professionals applying? Apply, because I think what, you know, as I went through it, and I always say, I went through a 10-year of the emotional roller coaster of, you know, I got an interview, I didn't get a second interview. I got a second interview, but I didn't get the job. So it was 10 years of that for me. And you know, but I still kept going. I still kept applying. And what I learned from one interview I applied it to another interview, and when I made a mistake in another interview, I made made some changes to the next interview. So I would say definitely keep applying. And I know, and we'll again discuss more as the questions go by, but it is very easy to get discouraged. And I think one thing I always say is do not. If this is your passion, if this is what you want to do, don't get discouraged, because your time will come. Everybody's time is different.
I love that. That's absolutely correct. Thank you, Sara. Okay, the next question is going to be for Anne. We know that you were recently hired, so I know you probably have, definitely a fresh perspective, right? So the question for you is, can you talk about your recent job search experience? I think Sara alluded a little bit to how it could be a little frustrating, but what was the job search process like for you, and what did you learn along the way? What kind of insights can you offer to aspiring counselors, full-time counselor position search?
Thank you, Maria. So my recent job search, I guess it kind of has to go back to my career change, as I mentioned earlier, and as we all kind of touch base with the Q&A, was at some point in my current job at the law firm, it was not going very well. And I knew that I had a passion to want to help. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. And so when I went into the graduate program, it really opened up my eyes that you're working with all students in different walks of life. And so I've always wanted to volunteer, and I was actually volunteering for my church. I was a camp counselor, but never thought of it as a job. And so because I had that passion to volunteer, I continued volunteering, as I mentioned earlier, with my internship. And so I did the beyond hours. As much as I wanted to have that job after I graduated, it wasn't there for me. And so I stayed in touch with Long Beach City College. And I said, can I still help you with workshops? Can I still help you with any events? Free of charge. This is just experience. And he says, of course. How could I deny, an extra set of helping hands when you already know what our curriculum's like and things like that. So I continued that, and it became a nice friendship because the transfer center coordinator, who was also the supervisor at Long Beach City College, he said, hey, there's this position that's open. And so that allowed me to kind of to look for it. He showed me to go through EdJoin, sign up for email information, but really it was his concern of knowing how well I worked and wanted me in a similar position. He really encouraged me to continue to apply and look for positions. And I remember he was saying, he's like, I know that this position at Santiago Canyon College is a short-term, temporary classified position. I know you have student debt, but it's a really good place to start. Because what is your goal, Anne? Your goal is to help students. And so I said, absolutely. So here I was working for free. And then I was at the short-term temporary position as a transfer center specialist. And sure enough, I'm helping students. So there was some learning curves that they teach you on the job that says, okay, at some point you can't advise on classes because that's what the counselors are for. But here's the application. Here's the general ed. If students wanted to know which general ed that they should use, you could show it to them, but then refer them over to the counselor. And so that was really helpful because no matter what, I do recommend students starting anywhere that they can on a campus that they're interested in, because you really get the feel for it. And your colleagues around you, classified administrators, counselors, faculty, they all get to know what your work ethic is like. And they're going to be in the panels or in the committees that could possibly hire you. And I really think that helped because as I was an adjunct counselor at Santiago Canyon College for like 7 years, they were sad when I was sad when I didn't get a position. They were happy when I got a phone call for the first interview. They were even happier when I got the second interview, and then they were sad when I didn't get the position. Those are the people I worked with, and they encouraged me. But I spent at least 5 years as an adjunct listening and being humble and being kind and definitely being helpful. So I know I showed my humility. If I came across as an adjunct if I came across a student that I wasn't very familiar with the program, I think back then Veterans Resources was very new to us. I would always knock on the door, send an email and say, how should I best advise the student? And I would be able to tell the student that I actually don't know very much about this program, but let me take your information. And I promise I will call you back or send you an email with more information and be helpful. And so many times students are like, wow, you did follow up. You did call me back. And I said, yes, that's what I said I was going to do. And so that was my job search, was really making sure that you can start in a short-term temporary. I must say that when I meet with a lot of newly graduates or sometimes new interns, they always want that full-time position right away. And I said, okay, you can try, but those questions are not easy. You can tell that the experience is very necessary because of how much work goes into being a full-time counselor. And so, so I would always suggest to kind of start off in a short-term position so that you get experience and you get the exposure of the students and the colleagues that you're working around. And the job process, I'd like to just make sure that anybody who's applying for full-time positions, please be very thorough in your supplemental questions. There's one simple question, but answer it in 2 to 3 paragraphs, but clearly, in depth, mention your experience. And so that kind of goes back to, if you are just recently graduated from your graduate program, you may not be able to answer some of those questions. I know if I look back and I was in my first or 2 years of adjunct, I don't think I'd be able to answer those questions. I might be really good at Googling and filling in the blanks, but I knew that if I was sitting there and I was being questioned honestly from my experience, I probably wouldn't be able to answer them honestly, in person at least. So those supplemental questions really gives insight to the candidates who are applying, but answer them very thoroughly. Don't be shy, but obviously be very honest with those questions and mention your examples, because that's what really sets you apart on whether or not you experienced that and you went through it. And then I guess the last part is the insights. And I like to repeat: be kind, be helpful, be humble with what you have. Consider that these students are really relying on you, and you want to have the confidence to help them. And it's wonderful for anybody who's out there doing a career change. You are the most fantastic people because you've chosen the better career, I'm sure. And that's what's going to be so helpful for these students, because you get to share with them that I thought I knew what I wanted to do when I was 22, and I experienced that. And for me, I realized I really disliked it, and it wasn't me. I was chasing the money. I was chasing the title. And when students hear that, and especially when they hear that you changed your career at 27, 29, 30, they're like, there's still hope for me. And I said, absolutely. I had support. I looked for support. My parents had no college. I'm the only person in my family with a master's degree, and the second in my family of 7 who have a bachelor's degree. So all of that was just being out there, knowing morally what was going to be good for me. And I think that's why I made the career change. So it wasn't even about the money. I had no idea what money I was going to make, but it was just, I wanted to help students, and I was happy to help them in their transfer specialist position, in their teaching their classes, and now as being a counselor. So I know that I misunderstood what the term networking meant. I thought that I had to sell myself on what networking meant. And I believe that how I received this position was that the hard work, the helpfulness that I provided to my colleagues around me, all of that showed my effort. And so that sold me to my colleagues. And so they really encouraged me. They knew of positions from their colleagues and told me, "Anne, you should apply for this." And I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. And so that's what helped me.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's really, really helpful. It is 1:45 and we have a few questions left, hint, hint, panelists, but I'll move on to Dipti Patel. This question's for you. As you know, one of the most important activities at a college or district is the hiring of new personnel. While faculty diversity has improved over the last 2 decades, the system's faculty do not reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of its student body. These sound like interview questions. Sorry, Dipti. What can districts do to attract a diverse pool of applicants? And what type of training needs to happen to better equip hiring committees when reviewing applicants?
All right, I want to try and keep this a little bit brief, just based on looking at the types of inquiries that are on the Q&A as well. This has been an intentional focus of the California Community Colleges in the last few years. We do draft EEO plans that, and included in that is data regarding examining our hiring practice. And so, for example, we are now required to look at who all of our applicants are, break it down by demographics, who are those that we selected to interview, how many did we interview and what their demographics were, and where we hired. And compare that to the student population. In doing that, it has allowed us to start seeing where we might have bias in our process, right? And so things have been changing along the way. And so, for example, at El Camino, we now are must have a when we request a position, we must show that we have a representative applicant pool, but also a representative committee. So when I submit documentation to HR, I actually do provide data on the position that I'm doing. Right now we're hiring for a full-time STEM position, for example. So I had to show what the breakdown of demographics of my STEM students were, what the breakdown of demographics of my STEM counselors were, and then show who's going to be on my committee. That's a huge change because we're trying to be intentional. Awareness is a big part of this process and making sure that we're sharing that data across the board. You know, because that does bring about change. We also have training for anyone who's serving on a hiring committee before they join the committee, as well as at the first meeting on implicit bias. We all are having to go through an EEO training, so we monitor one another, right, to check those things. This change is intentional. That being said, if you tend to look at most of the counseling departments across the California community colleges, we don't tend to have as much lack of representation as some of the academic areas do. But do know that this is something that the colleges are focusing on and wanting to change. And some of that needs to also be mirrored at all levels. So that needs to be something that the president and superintendent is also being intentional about. But for us, most counseling positions or full-time positions, they are couple levels of interview. So we do look at the first level of interview and who are we screening out before we go to the second level of interview. I'm going to try and keep that brief, Maria.
That was great. Thank you so much. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions and we'll just ask all of our counselors to chime in. I think you may have already spoken to this, but if you can talk about how to best prepare for that first full-time counseling interview, what tips can you offer counselors? Maybe what were some strategies, right, that you used or learned along the way? So Sara, Steve, Flor, and if you want to add anything else.
First and foremost, breathe. And somebody put that in, like, how do you get it, get rid of the anxiety? You have to continue to practice that. And I always share, again, my 10-year of the emotional roller coaster is, again, applying and learning from those experiences. Even if you're not eligible, I still encourage my mentees to apply so that they get the experience of what it's like to do an interview. One thing I do want to bring up that I see and I experienced myself, that I want counselors, especially adjunct counselors, to really open up their minds of applying to wherever they possibly can. I think one of the things that I learned the hard way is that I was at a community college and I applied multiple times. And I think Anne mentioned that she applied a couple times too, at her campus. I applied multiple times at this particular campus and I never got hired. And of course it hurts. And of course, I was devastated. But then I realized that I wasn't meant to be at that community college, and I needed to be okay with that. And sometimes, we especially as freeway flyers, we spend our time at maybe more than one community college for many years. And when a position opens, all of our colleagues within that, campus apply. And then we think, well, we've done all these things and they're going to hire me because of this. I just want you to open yourself up in applying to other community colleges, because you just never know where you will actually be needed. And like I said, that happened to me and I was devastated. And then I got a full-time job and I realized this is where I was meant to be. So as you start your interviews, I think Flor mentioned this, in that get to know the community college that you are applying, that you are interviewing with. Okay, look at their student population. Do you represent some of that student population? And then make sure that you do a little bit of research. We always tell, and if we're all counselors in here, we always tell our students to, with their personal statements, right? With their PIQs, be honest, research the school, make sure it's the campus you would want to go to. Same thing. Is it a campus you would want to work at? What kind of student population is it? Review, the mission statement of that department, of that campus, to see if it's the same values you have. Because a lot of the times, we'll have counselors interview and they have no clue what they're either interviewing for, or they don't know what our department's, mission and goals are. And I'll let other people chime in.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. If you're able to make it through the paper screening and you're making it to the interview, it is really, really important that you bring your best foot forward. So I would say really encourage you to practice, right? In terms of just telling your story in a succinct way, that's not rambly and a repetition of your whole resume. I think the nerves thing, it's okay to be nervous, but you can't let the nerves overcome you in the moment and not allow you to do your very best and shine in that interview process. The interviews, so for example, just to give you some insights too, we are our adjunct pool, we had 120 people apply to our adjunct pool, but we can't interview everybody for adjunct pool. We have so many qualified people because there's only a set amount of time. So we are able only to offer 18 people an interview. And so it becomes, that's difficult to screen down. And so then in order for us to screen 18 people, we can't give everybody an hour interview. It's going to be the interviews are typically pretty short sometimes for the adjunct. So you have to also watch your time. And so that's really important thing too, is when you're in the interview process, look to see how many questions are provided for you. And then, as we're not doing in this webinar by going really long with our interview questions, our responses, don't do that in an interview. Make sure you answer every question, because we will cut you off. If there are 10 questions and you only speak and you only got to question 4, then that is it, right? The other thing is you answer the question. To read the question thoroughly as they're asked to you, make sure you understand it before you respond, because if you also don't respond to the question that was asked, then again, it's difficult for us to evaluate you on that. And again, it's very rubric, and we're checking boxes and making sure that you're answering questions and judging you against other folks who are in our pool and in the interview process. So that's also really important. Be ready for multiple kinds of questions, not just we ask you a question, you respond. We have teaching demonstrations where you have to show us that your presentation skills. So be really thoughtful about how you present or what you present, and don't read a PowerPoint slides. Make sure you're engaging and you can talk with students, that you can talk with the audience, and be extemporaneous in the moment. We also sometimes do role plays. In some of our interviews, and then sometimes we'll also do like transcript evaluations, or sometimes we do writing demonstrations. So we'll do all kinds of different things to really see, kind of like vet individuals in all different areas that we know that we need to have their skills present and available for our students. And so I'll pull up there and turn it over to Flor.
Hi, everyone. So I'm hoping my Wi-Fi doesn't crash right now, but just to add to that, it's normal to feel nervous. Just know that it's normal. Okay. But try to help take control of that. And by that, I mean is you are prepared. You can do this. You have gone in, you have already gone to the point where you're going to get an interview. So that's your shot, right? So take a walk around that campus. Let that campus set in. I mean, I know it's kind of cheesy, corny, but take a walk on that campus if you can, and let it all set in. If you do not get an interview, I'm going to say this out loud in this meeting is do not take it personal. Right now, currently, it is super competitive. And when I say that is there are many adjuncts with years of experience, direct experience. And perhaps committees are having, there's only a certain amount of individuals that they can invite to an interview for various reasons, logistics or what have you. And so it's tough. It's tough to be on a committee, and you have so many wonderful, competent counselors that want to get that shot to that interview, right? The other is make sure that you get to know the campus, but also get to know their student data, their metrics. Go on to the chancellor's office, get to know what their data looks like. And that way you can speak to their campus. It's very personal. This interview is letting the folks in the room, whether you have a mix of deans, of maybe program coordinators, faculty, classified students, they want to know what you know about their campus and how you fit into that campus. Also, allow time during the interview to talk about your personal story. It's so important for us to get to know you through the interview, who you are. So you're answering the questions, you're giving us examples, but also who are you? At the end of the day, how are you going to contribute? Where do you come from? Are you first gen? What are your experiences? Sometimes in the first question where it lends to some of that, right? So let us know a little bit about that as you weave that into your experiences or direct experiences as a community college counselor, other experiences working. I know there's some inquiries on working at the 4-year, experiences working as a classified. So those are super important. Thank you.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to combine these last 2-3 questions. And all panelists, feel free to chime in. So, what are some of the characteristics, right, that stand out, attributes, skills when you're looking at a resume and choosing to, invite someone to an interview? And what about those that are not getting interviews? What would you, if you had, 2-3 words to say on those topics, what would you advise?
I'll jump in. I'm going to say take a deep read on the job posting. In the job posting, they are listing some desired qualifications. Make sure you're addressing those, whether it be in the cover letter or on your resume. Some of our positions are highly specialized, and the reality is we have many qualified, phenomenal counselors applying. So sometimes when we have a specialized position, we're reading a little bit closer onto those things. And so if it says bilingual, if it says experience with certain populations, make sure you're putting it there. I know a number of individuals might be transitioning, whether it be from a classified position, K-12, or working at a 4-year university and trying to get into the California community college system. I'll just be honest, it's not easy, but it's not impossible, right? Don't be discouraged, but do take a look at what those positions are. We do hire counselors that are for outreach, for early college programs, dual enrollment programs, and things like that. And that's where you can really highlight some of your school skills and experience. Similarly, if you worked at the 4-year university, we're hiring transfer counselors, but make sure that you're highlighting it. Dr. Batista talked about 125 applications. We might interview 25 to 35 for a part-time pool. And so when we're going through that, it's a highly standardized way where we're looking at that rubric. So make sure that information is out there so it's easy to spotlight. If you're going to write more than a 1 to 2 page cover letter, know what you're having to say. Don't just reiterate your resume. I'll let others join.
I think
Can I add one more?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
We get a lot of incomplete applications. I get a lot of cover letters that I know you're applying to a lot of positions that it's saying to a different school. Take the time to really review your materials before you submit it, because it can be a turnoff.
Yes, I agree. I was recently in a committee, and that goes with the people that are also writing your letters of recommendation. I was just in a committee, and the applicant submitted a letter of recommendation from another school or for another position, and it really didn't, and that was a turnoff, because then, we felt that the applicant wasn't paying attention to what we were asking for. And I think, this is also, I'm looking at the Q&A, and I hear you. For those that don't have all the experience or a lot of the experience, I can tell you, for example, Santa Monica College used to have, and because of the pandemic and, with staff changes, we used to have what we called the 4C internship program. And that is usually where we would, get to meet recent graduates, and we take them through what we do at Santa Monica. But unfortunately, again, like I said, due to COVID and staff changes, we have not been able to bring that program back. And at Santa Monica, it's hard to, one thing that I used to tell people is shadow people, shadow other counselors, where a campus allows you to. I know Anne talked about her experience, but unfortunately, not all campuses will allow you to do that. Santa Monica College, unfortunately, is one of those campuses, because we had an incident where a counselor or somebody that was shadowing one of our counselors got hurt, and then we could not invite any more people that were not part of the counseling department. So, but if you are at a campus, or of a campus that does allow you to shadow to get that experience, take advantage of that. I know that there's also volunteer. If you go, the Puente program usually likes to see mentors. And so, whatever experience you can get, I think is very important to help you put something under your belt. And I'll let other people chime in.
And I would just say briefly, we are professional counselors. Human relationships is our gig, our thing. So nurture all of your relationships. And I look at this panel, and across my 27 years, I've known a couple of these individuals for that lifespan, right? That work span, and in various capacities. And so this is a job that really requires you to have really good networking skills and strong relational skills, so that you can build upon that. And then I understand the frustration about, folks who don't have a lot of experience trying to get adjunct pools. Well, when you're in a position like this, on this side, when you get on the other side of the webinar, when you're on this side of the screen and your face is showing, that's when you sit in those committees and you advocate and you get into the role, so you bring new people in. And so that's the journey and the cycle. It can be frustrating, but I just implore you to hang in there, to network, to build relationships, don't burn any bridges, and just do the best you can in the position that you're at, and shine in that position. And people will see that shine. They will see you beaming, and they will notice it. And hopefully that will allow you to move into the next level of your professional career.
And I just wanted to add one last thing to that, is if there aren't any adjunct positions, because it just kind of depends. Every school hires differently, right? Depending on the funding and all that. If there aren't any special program positions out there, temporary classified positions, get your foot in the door into the California Community College and grasp a foundation of what the California Community College is all about, student services areas, counseling and guidance areas, because the landscape of our system has dramatically changed. The role of the counseling faculty has been changing. And so, think about some leadership roles that you might have been in that can help to demonstrate your ability to come in as a faculty, whether it's an adjunct or full-time tenured faculty position. And then, I can put myself out there because I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I'd be willing to look at resumes. I mean, I can't look at hundreds of them, but I can certainly help out and support we are here if you need any help. And then anyhow, but that's where I wanted just to remind you that there are other positions. If you're not able to get an adjunct position, getting your foot in the door to create some foundation.
Okay, thank you so much. We are getting close, right? We have until 2:30. So I do want to ask one last question to our panelists. Dr. Dipti Patel had to leave, by the way. She left a very nice message in the chat for everyone. Wish you all the best. Be patient and persevere. Don't be discouraged or take it personally. She also sent me a chat privately and asking to share the questions, and she said she was willing to answer. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. Maybe we'll put those out there. So we'll save the questions and send them to her and figure out a way to make them available. Okay, so the last question for our panelist counselors, can you talk about trainings and initiatives counselors who want to work in the community college should be knowledgeable about today when applying?
I wrote down a few things, and I see it from the micro scale to like the very specific work that we do, the technical work that we do, and helping students understand, what are the transfer requirements between, from a community college to UCI's computer science program. Those types of things you need to have training in, and we all need that training ongoing. We're lifelong learners, and even after so many years, I still get that training. So having that level of understanding is really critical to do the job every day when the student is sitting in your office. But then also think about more of the wider things that are happening in the community colleges, right? And even just in education in general, trainings like guided pathways or any of the DEI work. And there's so much happening now, online. So to get specialized training to work with either special populations or populations that maybe you're not familiar with, to build up your competencies and working with multiple students with multiple identities, I think is really important as well. And then finally, I'm also thinking about teaching, right? So most of us at community college, at least in our areas, do some bits of teaching. And I never got any teaching classes when I got my master's degree in clinical psychology. I got a lot of counseling, but nothing about becoming a good teacher. And so try to get into some type of training, whether it's the online teaching certification or just the teaching class in general and how to teach adults. We're doing a lot of dual enrollment. I know that's huge and that's growing, and we're sending a lot of our counselors into high school settings to teach high school students. So having skill sets to teach dual enrollment, a counseling class in a high school setting will also set you apart and give you that background. So those are the kind of trainings I'm thinking about, is like the individualized work that we do kind of at the technical level, but that's also on like the global level and the work that we do in education. Because as a faculty member at a community college, I'm also sitting on the academic senate. I'm sitting on committees and curriculum and all professional development. So I need to have a broader knowledge of what things are going on that impact our institution and our students so that I can be, the best counselor that I can be.
I do have one quick thing to add. So this is Anne again. I would recommend going off of what Dr. Batista said was, if most of you have your bachelor's degree, try going to substitute teaching. Talk about a humbling experience. So I was a substitute teacher for high schools for whatever grade level that I could get, because again, we had debt we had to pay. And I didn't land any adjunct positions, but I applied. There's always substitute teachers that are needed. It's a hard position, but being able to list on your resume, and I think to be able to talk to other faculty on a campus, on any campus, that say that I've kind of been in your shoes a little bit. Yes, maybe I didn't, teach a whole class to myself, but I have experienced your student. And then when you get to the community college level, you get to see some of those students again, and you get to empathize with what it was maybe like for them when they were in high school or in middle school. Now that they're getting a little bit older and they're at the community college now. But see, those are all the little experiences. And I wrote in my notes that start small, but it's more than just small. It's just any experience for you. And it's a paid experience. And I think that's really helpful, because I know that when I graduated and I had and I knew positions were hard to come by, I was going to take anything that I could, because again, my goal was to help students. And I knew that when the time was right, my position will open and I will be there for them. But when I went in for those interviews, as everybody mentioned earlier, you have to feel confident. I personally was just nervous because these were people I've never met before, but I was excited to get that interview because I knew that I've had experience in all those questions, in all of their requirements that were listed on the job posting, and I could answer those questions. And if you feel that you had to research and you have to memorize text after text, then I'm not sure that it's going to portray very well in an interview. So just gain all the different experience, all the different walks of life, to be in possible the shoes that you might be meeting with, your students and the colleagues that you could be working with.
All right, did we get a chance to hear from everybody with that last question? Just thought it was so important, you know. So we have about 20 minutes and we have about 51 questions. I do see that there's about 23 questions that already got answered. So if you want to look through that too, but I thought we could take the last few minutes to just kind of go through some of these questions. And if any of our panelists want to add anything that maybe we haven't covered, we can go.
Yeah, I can answer one that was specifically for Santa Monica. Is SMC's internship program only open to grad students, or is also open? It is open to grad students and students who have a master's degree. What we wanted, and again, I just want to clarify that unfortunately at this time we do not have the 4C internship program available, but what we were looking for is candidates who did not have much community college experience. And we did get applicants who had maybe 1 or 2 years of experience under their belt, and we would not accept them. It was only for those that had very little community college experience, because we wanted to give you an idea as to how the community college system worked, at least Santa Monica College. But it also was never a guarantee that participating in that 4C internship program would guarantee you a job at Santa Monica College. We have seen our 4C interns get jobs at all different community colleges, but yes, they could have a master's degree, but very little experience in community college. Thank you.
I have one here that I think is pretty interesting, because I think the interview process, right, is so grueling. So, you know, we have someone that asked that they have, you know, applied to several and adjunct positions, but don't seem to interview well. So I assume that the assumption is, I assume that you have received an interview, but you don't interview well. So the question they're asking is, do you have any interview tips? So I know we talked about the knowledge, but just in the moment, in the hot seat, you know, we talked about breathing, but any other tips that you might have for folks?
I do. I have some tips. I mean, I think part of it is practice, right? And then being able to speak, you know, extemporaneously off the cuff, and like in conversation. But also before the prep you have to do is, I think what you have to do is you have to organize your experiences and your answers into certain categories in your own head, because we're going to ask you similar things. Like we're going to give you ask you some broad things about your experiences. Then we're going to ask you some things that are about either special things that you've done or populations that you've worked with, or specific, you know, activities that you've done. So you need to be, and you're looking at your resume, how would I tell the story about this? Right, and really share that in a way that communicates not just information, but also shares a little bit about your own personality and the way you approach things. And I think that's a really important thing, is to really begin thinking more like a conversation, like someone's asking and learning more about you, versus there's like a right or wrong answer. Because when you can make the room feel like it's a conversation and you're giving us information and it feels like it's very natural, but we're also learning a lot about you in the process of you answering that question, it brings the tension down and it allows you to, I think, feel more at ease. So I think that's one of the key tricks, is just being able to again, read the question, answer the question, and then in your own mind, already have some type of response that you've already maybe thought about in advance. And then it's always great that you can add a story about how you've connected it to a student that you work with, so that it feels like it's a seamless conversation versus next question, next question, next question, because that's not gonna be very memorable. But when you can leave the committee with something that's like, wow, that I'm not gonna forget that. And then even at the end, thinking about maybe some really closing statement. This will be really long. There'll be like 1 or 2 things about that really you want the committee to remember about you as you walk out of the room, and about the interview that you just had, and about your commitment or passion to the work that you do. So I think those would be a couple of tips that I would want to share with folks. And I guess the last one I would share is when we go around and introduce ourselves and our titles, listen to that. Okay, the transfer director is in the room, the dean of counseling is in the room, the EOPS director is in the room, the DSPS coordinator in the room. So as I'm giving responses and I'm talking about my experience at EOPS, I'm looking at the EOPS counselor. If I'm talking about my experience about working with students and I understand the associate degree for transfer and how that works, I'm looking at the transfer director to make sure that everybody in that room is like going, yeah, yeah, and and really feeling like, yeah, you're connecting with the group that's in the room. So that would be my last piece of advice.
There was a question in there about someone asking advocating for a counselor coordinator position. And I just wanted to briefly speak to that, and maybe Sarah and Steve can also chime in. But the biggest thing is getting data from your institutional research, looking to see what the needs are. If you're in a multi-district campus, looking to see, do they have that program at the other campus? What is the comparability? Talk to your dean, your department coordinator, get buy-in basically from constituents on the campus to advocate for the need to have that program. Perhaps there have been pilots that are similar to that program that you can get some research or information on to better present to your dean or coordinator or director. And then just really, like I mentioned, doing the research and just kind of getting all the facts around it, but also most importantly is how or what you're going to propose, right? Getting like a proposal together. I think those are some of the things that I would, kind of highlight and really share with you.
There's like 3 questions in the chat that I see that I think could be combined because it's asking the same question. And I think one of the panelists talked a little bit about it. For those who are in classified positions or work at high school or work at the Cal State, right? And they have the degree, right? They have the minimum quals, but they don't have the direct community college experience. Or maybe they just have a year, a little bit less. What are some tips, right, that you would recommend to kind of get their foot in the door, so to speak, or, get interviews?
I guess I'll go. I mean, for a classified employee, I think really sometimes it's difficult to do within your own district. They just don't allow you to work in 2 roles. You can't work as a classified professional and an adjunct. So you may have to go outside. And I know I was a full-time classified employee, but I was working adjunct at another district. So that allowed me even to get some beginning experiences in the classroom and those kinds of things as I kind of built my repertoire of skills and my resume along the way. For folks who are in high schools or at 4-year universities or at other places, I think it's really important that when I'm looking at your resume and I'm looking at you as a potential candidate, that you have some connection to a community college student, right? Or students that you have. For me, it's important because the cultures are very different. The culture is very different at a community college than it is a CSU, than it is a UC, and at a private school. So I would want to know, one, do you have any experience working with community college students? Maybe it's even as a transfer advisor at the 4-year school, which would be great because you'd obviously been working with those students, who have been coming from community college. So I think that's, for me, one of the things that I'm looking for, right? And as a high school counselor, I mean, I think that's great experience and they have, great knowledge of A through G and the advising piece of it all. But I would also want to see some type of connection to a local community college, again, whether it's teaching an adult enrollment program or shadowing or doing something to get a sense of how the community college campus culture is. Because again, it's, for me, I found it's very different. And for my colleagues that I talk with at the other segments, it's unique. So I think that's part of it as well, is making sure that that person has a good understanding of how a community college counseling faculty member works. And that's a different thing too, is at other places, universities, they're advisors, but we're a community college faculty. So there's a little bit of a different in terms of our roles and responsibilities that makes the position a little bit different. So I'm not sure if Flor or Anne have any other comments to share.
I can, thank you, Steve, for that. I think as a former university representative, I couldn't have easily gotten a job at a community college unless I had community college experience. Yes, I knew how admissions worked. I knew how we admitted students from a community college, but that did not, the experience that, and I would do workshops. And as a matter of fact, I do workshops for Steve and Flor, but that did not show that I had experience working with, the nuances that the community college counselor deals with on an everyday basis. And so then I went from, being an admissions counselor for the UC system to then becoming an advisor. And that's where I got to see what it was like to be somewhat what a community college counselor was doing. So, again, it's very, very important to get that experience in there. But I also, again, want to go back to that initial question. Absolutely, those career changers, you all are important, but we need to get that community college experience under our belt, because that's what's going to, get your foot in the door of, getting a job. There was a question in there. Oh, there was a question in there that I wanted to answer to, do you need to speak Spanish? And do you need to, have the same be of the same demographic of the community college that you're applying to? And the answer is no. You have to look at the community college and what the makeup of it is. Obviously, it would help if you are, applying to a community college where you see that it is, predominantly Latinx, and they require, and they're looking for a Spanish speaker. But the community colleges are all so different. So look at the data, look at what the makeup of the campus is like. But you absolutely do not have to, be able to speak Spanish to be able to apply to a community college or be of that demographic.
All right, thank you all so much. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I just want to give a huge thank you to the panelists, Dr. Bautista and Sara, Dr. Huerta, Dipti, I know she's not here, but thank you all so much. And of course, everybody that attended and participated in all those questions that we have. I'm hoping we can save those questions, because I got some ideas for those questions, Lydia, for the Professional Development Committee. At this time, it's 2:23. We'll go ahead and end our webinar. Again, thank you all so much, and have a great rest of the day and an amazing weekend. It's really great to see so many people interested in our field, because it's the best. So thank you all so much. Have a great time. Have a great weekend.